Jerry Jones knows how much of the roster is directly on his shoulders. So if he sees it as a failure in the roster, he doesn't see that as Jason Garrett's issue. He sees that as his own issue, and he wants to go out and fix it.
Today's Friday, July 20th. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. I'm Ari Temkin. We are now officially 1 week away from training camp starting in Oxnard, California. I will be out with 105.3 The Fan and the Cowboys Beat in Oxnard, California, a week from Sunday. So very excited to get out to Oxnard to give you a up-close and personal view of what this 2018 Dallas Cowboys team is going to look like. Now, earlier this week, we learned that one guy who will be attending Oxnard, California's training camp will be Randy Gregory. Remember him? He has been reinstated conditionally by the National Football League. Randy Gregory, of course, a former second-round pick of the Dallas Cowboys, at once was considered one of the top edge rushers in the 2014 draft, but he fell all the way to the Cowboys in the second round because he failed drug tests. He played in his first season for the Cowboys in 12 games in 2015, registered 7 tackles and 4 assists. The following season, 2016, at 24 years old, he appeared in 2 games, had a sack, 8 tackles, and 1 assist, but again, played in 2 games, so 14 total games in his entire career. And Randy Gregory, who has failed numerous drug tests and was kicked out of the NFL, has been reinstated conditionally for the first time since 2016. So 2 full seasons, basically, and Randy Gregory has not played football. And there is a ton of excitement about Randy Gregory being reinstated from Dallas Cowboys fans. A lot of excitement and very, very high expectations. Perhaps expectations that he becomes a starter, that he becomes a meaningful contributor. And I'm not saying that he's not going to be, but there is still a long, long road ahead for Randy Gregory in order to get to that point in time. Now, Mike Fisher, who is the Dallas Cowboys insider for 105.3 The Fan, wrote all of the conditions that Randy Gregory has to abide by, according to the NFL, before he can actually be totally let back in the NFL, if that makes sense. You might have heard that he was reinstated, but there are some major, major constraints on that reinstatement. So the first of that is that he has to, and will be strictly required, quote-unquote, to inform league officials of his whereabouts at all times, and that not doing so may carry the same weight as a future failed drug test, which will likely be banished from the NFL indefinitely. Fisher also reports that there is a 2,000-page presentation handed to the NFL by Gregory, which included letters from former NFL players Chris Carter and Michael Strahan, Hall of Famers, and Cowboys teammates Sean Lee, Tyrone Crawford, and Jeff Heath. Bobby Belt, a previous guest of the Cowboys Beat, actually had the letters written by all 3 members of the Dallas Cowboys and what they said. That 2,000-page presentation, along with Randy Gregory's in-person interview with Roger Goodell, in which he talked about joining a 12-step sponsor program, a life coach, and a live-in companion that will help with that structure needed as he attempts to play in the NFL. Also, Gregory will be able to travel with the team to Oxnard, California. Again, this is all from Mike Fisher from 105 through the Fan and 247sports.com. Gregory will remain on the reserve commissioner's suspension list, meaning, again, he'll be in Oxnard at camp, but will not be able to fully practice until he's been moved off of that reserve commissioner suspension list. A timetable for that is not known. So this is all really, really important information. It's not as if he's been reinstated and he is now ready to start playing and practicing with the Cowboys. And on top of that, even when he is removed from the reserve commissioner suspension list, he still has to pass multiple drug tests constantly ongoing, and whenever the league asks, he has to tell them where he is and what he's doing, and he has to have a live-in life coach that will help to implement that structure. So there is a lot in place for Gregory to be successful, but let's see if he can do it now. His ability to be successful for the Dallas Cowboys, there are a lot of hurdles he still has to pass, but so long as he's willing to abide by all of that criteria, he can be successful off the field that will allow him to play on the field in games, something he has not done very successfully throughout the course of his career. Now, Randy Gregory came into the league with a failed drug test, which means he's in the program. Once you're in the program, you're subject to random drug tests. Multiple of those random drug tests, Randy Gregory failed, which is why he's been banished from the NFL since 2016. Now, Randy Gregory has issues with marijuana, with weed, smoking weed. And a lot of this is due to mental health, something he's talked about. And it's how he's able to cope with some of his mental health issues. And so that's a huge component of this too. It's just so bizarre to me how anti-logical this entire situation is from a standpoint of the discussion of opioids and the difficulty of opioids, which the NFL willingly distributes to its players, and just how unbelievably addictive they are, and players take up for pain. Now, I'm not suggesting that players take opioids for mental health issues, but that weed is a known pain reliever and is not nearly as addictive or at all physically addictive like opioids are. And there is no known person in human history that's overdosed from weed, and a huge, huge overdose rate for people that take opioids, that become dependent upon opioids. Now, I get it. Look, the rules are in place. He knew the rules before he came in, and he broke the rules, and there are a lot of people that play in the NFL that are able to bypass the drug testing policies pretty easily. So I understand, I completely understand that vantage point, but I do think it's worth noting that of all the things that Josh Gordon or Randy Gregory have had to go through in order to get back to the NFL, relative to the type of situations the NFL has been involved with when it comes to domestic violence, it seems like a completely inverted, it seems like a completely backwards judicial system, right? Like Randy Gregory and Josh Gordon are the worst people on earth because they smoke pot, and yet there are guys like Tyreek Hill who punched his pregnant girlfriend in college and hasn't faced any NFL suspension for it. Seems a little ridiculous. Now you might be saying, well, that was in college. It's different. It wasn't when he was in the NFL, like Randy Gregory when he was in the NFL. Remember, the NFL suspended Terrell Pryor for Tattoo-gate prior to the NFL. So this just goes to show the ridiculousness of and the charade of the NBA's judicial system and policing morality, how backwards it is and how inconsistent it is. Now, with all that being said, Randy Gregory, again, based upon the bylaws of the NFL, has a lot of hurdles to overcome in order to be a successful NFL player. And so it's not just unconditional reinstatement and he's good to go now. He's got a lot of different pieces, as Mike Fisher reported, that he's got to adhere to before he can even see the field and be able to see the field consistently. And he's on a very, very short leash, if you can even call it a leash. With that being said, on previous episodes of the Cowboys Beat, I have looked at the defensive end position. And there is just a lot of players that are figuring in the roster discussion when you look at that defensive end pass rushing position. Now, essentially, 3 players along the Cowboys' defensive front play as an edge rusher or as a pass rusher. So, you've got DeMarcus Lawrence, Taco Charlton, and David Irving. And then behind them, basically Tyrone Crawford, and now Randy Gregory, and then Jihad Ward, Coney Ely, Charles Tapper, Dorrance Armstrong, Dayton Jones, Lewis Neal, Austin Larkin. This is a lot of guys that are decent names on this Dallas Cowboys team that are not going to make the team. So we know Lawrence is going to make it. D-Law is going to make the team, and David Irving is going to make the team, and Taco Charlton is going to make the team. Tyrone Crawford. That's your 4 locks right there. Now, Randy Gregory is probably going to make the team. Jihad Ward's probably going to make the team. That's 6. Dorrance Armstrong, since he's a drafted rookie, will probably make the team. That's 7. So now you get down to how many spots left for Coney Ely, Charles Tapper, Dayton Jones, Lewis Neal, and Austin Larkin. My guess is Coney Ely, Dayton Jones, and Charles Tapper are fighting for 2 spots at 9. But, you could certainly make an argument with David Irving going down that maybe they'd go beyond that. So what's interesting about this is the Cowboys actually figure to be pretty good along the defensive end position, at the pass rushing position. And not just based on numbers. DeMarcus Lawrence is coming off a season in which he was an absolute monster and had 14.5 sacks. David Irving's been pretty consistent. He's going to miss the first 4 games, but he's been pretty consistent throughout the course of his career. Tyrone Crawford's probably underrated. He's an easy target for Cowboys fans, but probably underrated. And if you've been paying attention to some of the rhetoric from Brian Broaddus and guys in the know when it comes to covering the Dallas Cowboys, Jihad Ward has had a pretty good offseason program and is a guy that Rod Marinelli has thought very highly of for a very long period of time. Dorrance Armstrong, a first-round Dorrance Armstrong, a rookie. So for a guy like Gregory, who hasn't played in 2 years, it's not as if he's just going to be able to just go out there and automatically give you a ton of snaps. And not only that, but let's just see how long he is on this commissioner's exempt list. Let's see how long before he's actually practicing with the team. And a reminder, they're going to start practice just a few days after showing up for camp. So how long will he be out? And again, with so many numbers at this position, and with the very, very short leash that Randy Gregory's on, despite the fact that he's very promising and a former second-round pick, Brian Broaddus told me on 105.3 The Fan earlier this week that he's no lock to make that roster. Now, that seems like one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is the people that think he's automatically going to come in and be a starter and be extremely effective. Now, I do understand, and this is a great point made by Tom Ryle of Blogging the Boys, who is going to be the guest on today's podcast coming up in just a few minutes from right now. But Gregory, his skill set, speed, is something that it's not necessarily something you lose, right? So it's not necessarily something that he's got to take weeks and weeks to get back. So if there is a skill set that someone can have at this position that would allow them to miss a couple of years and then practice time once they're reinstated that can still be successful, it's Randy Gregory. But still, let's at least temper our expectations a bit for a guy that has a very short leash when it comes to the NFL, hasn't played in 2 years. We still don't know when he's going to practice, and there's major, major numbers, a huge logjam at the pass rushing position, which is a very, very good problem to have for the Dallas Cowboys. All right, now let's talk with the aforementioned Tom Ryle from Blog of the Boys, a fantastic writer. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. We are a week away from training camp getting started, so, how could you not be doing great?
Yeah, and, with the great news that we're actually going to be getting Randy Gregory back, I had my doubts. I didn't have enough trust in Roger Goodell, but, I think for once they actually looked at the stuff and saw what was there, something that the NFL offices haven't always done. And they saw that this was something that was, if nothing else, it was an example to anybody who gets in trouble is here is the way you go about rehabilitating yourself.
What are your expectations for Randy Gregory? What do you think reasonable expectations should be for him coming back after basically not playing for 2 years?
It's hard to say because he has so much natural talent. His speed coming off the line is something that he may have been able to come back with just as it was before. I know he's been working out faithfully as long as he's been on the suspension and the having been banned from the league. So I think we may see him starting to show a little bit of his old self by the start of the season. And I think that, I don't expect him to roll in as the starter, but I expect him to maybe get moved into the starting role sometime in mid-season. Now, it could all collapse, but I don't think it will because unlike some players that are a lot about technique and strategy, he just has great physical ability, and he tends to win right away when he's pass rushing.
Yeah, and you're right. He's got speed, which you can't teach, and
yeah.
isn't that doesn't go away. Not at least where he is in his life. So there are certainly translatable pieces to Randy Gregory's skill set that it wouldn't seem would be a hamperment to his return.
No, and of course now it gives the Cowboys an entirely different problem. They're going to have like 10 defensive ends. How many are they going to be able to keep? When is it going to be like, okay, who wants to get the going on injured reserve hangnail out there? We've got to stash somebody here.
What do you think the Cowboys need Earl Thomas?
They could use him. I don't know that they need him. There's a lot of people that seem to think that he's the make or break for the season, and that I'm not going to buy into that at all. I think it would be good to have him. I think Chris Richard could do a really good job with him serving as the mentor to the young defensive backs that Dallas has. But I don't know if it's worth talking about a lot because right now it's all in Seattle's court. It's up to them. He's under contract to them. And the Cowboys made an offer during the draft, according to all reports. Seattle passed on it. And now it's just going to be a matter of seeing who wins the stare down between Thomas and the Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And it's just so bizarre considering, I mean, they found so many other parts of Legion of Boom expendable and yet not Earl Thomas. And he's unhappy. And he wants a long-term contract. Like it almost just seems like they want to spite Earl Thomas for the sake of spiting him and not for the sake of making a better move for their organization.
Yeah, it doesn't make a great deal of sense what's going on, which may just mean that we don't see what's happening. We don't really understand the full situation.
I don't think, Earl Thomas is a make or break because I think, look, they're going to have a really good offense, and I think, their secondary should be pretty good. Their defensive line should be pretty good. Their linebacking core should be improved. So, they don't need to have a dominant defense because their offense is going to be dominant. But on the other side of that, I see just such an important piece in Earl Thomas, a leader, in that locker room, a guy that's played his entire career with Chris Richard, a leader for that secondary. It's such a young secondary, that how much could Chidobe and Lewis and Anthony Brown and Xavier Woods and Kayvon Frazier, like how much of a benefit could those guys have for having a guy in that locker room? And then ultimately, Tom, I think, for me, my major concern along that defense is not Jeff Heath at strong safety, but it's Xavier Woods at free safety.
Well, we'll have to see. I know that the team seems to like what they've got in Woods, which is one reason why they haven't really gone out there. I think they're also really committed to playing a bit of a waiting game. Look at the safeties that are still on the market. You've got I think Eric Reed is his name, and Trey Boston, and they're just nobody's picking them up. And I think the Cowboys feel like they can roll into camp, get some preseason games under the belt before they have to make a decision on this.
You wrote an article about the Jason Garrett's future on the hot seat, that kind of thing. My belief of it is that if they don't make the playoffs, he's gone. They've used up excuses of injuries and other sort of factors. Do you think it's that simple?
I don't ever think it's that simple in the fact that something weird could happen again that would make Jerry Jones want to give him another year. I think Jones believes in what Garrett's doing more than he's ever believed in a coach and his ownership. And there seems to be a real close bond there. I think Stephen Jones has some of the same kind of faith in Garrett. And, there's also the fact that they remember 2014 and 2016 when everything was clicking for the Cowboys. So I think they've kind of got this thought that if we can just get the right pieces in place, he knows how to do it. And I think that might carry him, but if they don't have significant injuries, if they don't have some outside extenuating circumstance, then I think he's got to get back into the playoffs this year to keep his job.
Do you agree with that? Like, I know you kind of looked at it from a practical standpoint of the relationship between the Joneses and Jason, and they want him to be successful. I mean, he's their guy. They've given him all this time. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
I can see that if that 8 years is enough, if he can get into the playoffs this year, then okay, that probably buys him another couple of years. Especially if they get in and win a game or two. And of course, if they should run the table, then nobody's going to be talking about this. It's a semi-annual cycle. Every other year we go through this.
Yes.
Because everyone says, "Oh my God, he's a terrible coach," and I'm like, did you notice who the 2016 NFL Head Coach of the Year was? Come on, it doesn't just disappear. I think football tends to be a little bit too impatient, unless you're the Cincinnati Bengals. But sometimes they throw the person out, and it's not the head coach. It's your drafting was terrible. You didn't retain quality players. You re-signed the guys you should have got rid of, and vice versa. And it's not really on the head coach, but he's the one that takes it. Dallas has kind of gone the other direction. And I think part of that's because Jerry Jones knows how much of the roster is directly on his shoulders. So if he sees it as a failure in the roster, he doesn't see that as Jason Garrett's issue. He sees that as his own issue, and he wants to go out and fix it.
Every guest that I've had on the Cowboys Beat podcast as we lead up to the season, I've asked the same question. Over under 9.5 wins for the Cowboys.
I'm going over.
Going over. Why?
Do what now?
Why are you going over 9.5?
I just think that this is but remember the 2-year cycle? They're due. It's a even numbered year. They're due for a double-digit wins and a run in the playoffs. I just think they have. If they have the offensive line solved so that Dak Prescott doesn't get beat up and rattled, and they have Ezekiel Elliott back there, and these receivers are out there running the precise routes that Sanjay Law wants them to run, so they're there for Dak Prescott, the offense is going to be able to put points up. I think they're going to have a really good pass rush. I think we're going to be very pleasantly surprised with how Leighton Vander Esch fits in at linebacker. And I think they're going to wind up having one of the better trios of linebackers with him, Sean Lee, and Jalen Smith. And I think the secondary is going to be at least pretty solid. So, yeah, I don't see why not to be optimistic. There's natural churn in who makes the playoffs and who don't. And as I said, the Cowboys have been, bouncing on that now for 4 years. So let's just hope the trend continues.
Tom Ryle, fantastic writer for Blog of the Boys. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Tom Ryle, BTB. Appreciate your time, Tom. Thanks so much.
It's always a pleasure.
Tom Ryle from Blog of the Boys, who thinks that it's not as binary and simple as saying that if the Cowboys miss the playoffs this year, that Jason Garrett will lose his job, although Tom is certainly on my side of the over-under 9.5. I think the Cowboys are at 10-11 wins this year. He does too. And I think it's just as simple as their offensive line is going to be really good and their running back is going to be fantastic, and that's going to be good enough for top 5 offense, which is good enough for 10-11 wins in the NFL. As we continue our series breaking down each positional group for the Dallas Cowboys, want to take a look today at the running back position, which basically starts and pretty much ends with the former 4th overall pick Ezekiel Elliott, who is, if not the best running back in the National Football League, the second best running back in the National Football League, but I'd put my money on Zeke Elliott ahead of Todd Gurley every single day. If you're going to argue Gurley, sure. But most people listening to this podcast are Cowboys fans, so let's just, for the sake of argument, say that Zeke Elliott is the best running back in the National Football League. And he seems to be, based on the suspension, very underrated, severely underrated when you look at offseason lists and any of these stupid lists that rank players and the NFL's top 100. They are grossly underestimating and underrating a guy that is an unbelievable runner, has speed, but an unbelievable ability to run over fools. He also is as good of a blocker as he is a runner, and he's as good of a passer as a pass catcher as he is a blocker. And so he's just in the three areas, running, pass catching, and blocking, the three areas of running back, he just excels and is unbelievably good in all three categories, which is why, in my opinion, he's the best running back in the National Football League. Speed, ability to run people over, great pass catch ability out of the backfield, and a dynamic blocker in pass protection as well. And, last season, this team had to rely on its backups a lot. And Alfred Morris played a tremendous role in the running game for the Cowboys last year. Alfred Morris, who's no longer with the Dallas Cowboys, played in 14 games last year, 115 carries for 547 yards and 1 touchdown, an average of 39 yards a game and a 4.8 yards per carry average. Darren McFadden, who many people thought was going to replace Zeke Elliott when Zeke Elliott was out of the lineup, didn't end up doing that. A guy named Rod Smith, who was severely underrated coming into the year, ended up taking a much bigger load than people expected at 55 rushes, 232 yards, 4 touchdowns, an average of 4.2 per carry. Now, a lot of people will point to a statistic from last season that is, in my opinion, faulty logic. And they're going to say, well, look, you can't blame Zeke Elliott's suspension on the 9-7 season and the failures of the offense. They still had a very similar yards per carry average. They still put up very Zeke Elliott type numbers in the running game. Now, that's going to completely diminish how good Zeke Elliott is in the blocking area and in pass catching. And even if you want to take that into account, Rod Smith had 19 receptions for 200 yards, so he had almost as much yards in receiving than he did in rushing last season. But it's the yards per carry that people want to point to. And I think I understand that. But the number that's more important to that really gives you a good indication of just how much the Cowboys offense took a step back last year when Zeke Elliott wasn't available, is the points per game average, not the yards per carry average. Because the Cowboys, before Zeke Elliott went down, were averaging 28 points per game. That number went down to 18 points per game when Zeke Elliott left the team. The role that Zeke Elliott plays in creating and manufacturing points for this offense cannot be understated. Yes, the running game was effective last year between the 20s. But once they got into the red zone, once they got into the opponent's side of the territory, their play calling wasn't as dynamic. They couldn't do certain things, and they didn't have a guy like Zeke Elliott that inspired fear in the opposition. Between the 20s, they ran well, but they could not punch in touchdowns, and there is a 10-point difference between the amount of points they were scoring with Zeke Elliott in the lineup versus with Rod Smith and Alfred Morris shouldering the majority of the offense from the running back position. The depth chart this season for the Dallas Cowboys, the first-string running back is Ezekiel Elliott. The second-string running back is Ezekiel Elliott. The third-string running back is Rod Smith. And then the Cowboys have 3 guys probably fighting for one spot, depending on how the numbers work out in other places. There's fan favorite Bo Scarborough, who was a 7th-round draft pick by the Dallas Cowboys and is a fan favorite simply because he's a name that people know because he played at Alabama. But the key for their third-string running back, or I guess fourth based on Zeke being their first, second, and maybe even third string. No, Rod Smith is third string. So their fourth string is either going to be Bo Scarborough, Trey Williams, or Darius Jackson. Now, you might remember Darius Jackson, who spent time with the Cowboys. He's a guy that the Cowboys really like, and he's a guy that's made the Cowboys roster and has played special teams pretty well. So you could argue that the front runner for that third spot for the running back position for the Cowboys is actually probably led right now by Darius Jackson because of his familiarity with Jason Garrett's offense and because of the success that he's had on special teams as a core special teams player. Bo Scarborough didn't have to play a lot of special teams at Alabama. So while he may be potentially a better running back, and even that might not be the case, a major piece to Bo Scarborough's ability to make this team over a guy like Darius Jackson, over a guy like former Aggie Trey Williams, would be his ability to contribute in a meaningful way in core special teams. If you can't do that, then Darius Jackson is going to be the third running back of this team. And Bo Scarborough, despite the fact that he was just picked in the NFL draft by the Cowboys, will not make the team, and he was his 7th-round draft pick. But again, the running back position is going to be extraordinarily good, and it really starts and stops with Ezekiel Elliott. The Cowboys, in my opinion, will have a top 5 offense this season, because their offensive line is going to get back to what it had been a couple of years ago when it was the most dominant offensive line in football. And Zeke Elliott has none of the offseason shenanigans hanging over his head, no suspensions looming large. If he can play and stay healthy and engaged for 16 weeks, the Cowboys, based on their offensive line and their dynamic running game with Zeke Elliott, are going to have a top 5 offense, which absolutely should translate into 10 or 11 wins during the season. I'm Ari Temkin. This is the Cowboys Beat. A reminder, you can check me out on 105.3 The Fan in Dallas. I also stream live every single day at noon, talking a lot of Cowboys on Phantom. That's facebook.com/Watch Phantom, Phantom, Phantom. Make sure to check out the page and watch and subscribe every single day, again, at noon Central on Phantom at facebook.com/Watch Phantom. You can always tweet me. I am at Ari Sports, ARI Sports. But for now, I'm out.